Okay, time to do another award-losing episode of Cinemaholics. Just gotta call Will Ashton to find out what he thinks about the latest movies and TV shows. Oh wait. That's right, Will's out of town. On vacation. Without me. I guess he's hanging out with his family again. Or something, whatever. Oh well, I'm sure I can pass the time without him. Let's see, just gotta dig out the old smartphone and look at my contacts list. All right, who's available? No, John Stamos is probably still in bed. George Takei, oh no, he's still mad at me about that sprinkler thing. Weird, I thought I deleted Josh Peck's number. Oh, here we go. I haven't talked to Abby in a while.
Hello?
Abby Old Chessie, it's John Negroni.
Oh, right.
That's weird. You don't sound surprised to hear from me.
Yeah, Will might have mentioned you were going to call.
Wait, what? When did he...
About 2 weeks ago, he found out he was going out of town. I guess he had a feeling you were going to reach out.
Right. Well, anyway, how are you doing?
John, is this important?
What do you mean?
Look, I'm no therapist, but it seems to me like maybe you're struggling with some dependency issues when it comes to Will.
Abby, you're...
Scaring you again? Yeah, Will told me you'd say that.
Wow. Gosh, Abby, I mean, what am I supposed to do now?
Well, John, I have a surprise for you.
Yeah, well, I bet it won't make me happy one little bit.
Will, you can come out now.
Abby, if this is some kind of sick joke.
Hey, John.
Will, is that really you?
Yeah, it's me. I'm back from vacation early.
Will, is this whole thing some kind of big lesson you've been trying to teach me about not just social distancing, but emotionally distancing as well?
Honestly, not really.
Oh, okay.
Could we maybe just start the...
Yeah, let's get the show going.
Welcome once again to Cinemaholics. I'm John Negroni, box office columnist for Atom Tickets, staff writer for The Young Folks, and head writer of Cinemaholics.com. He is, of course, a pop culture writer for Cinema Blend, and he also reviews films for Cinemaholics.com. It's Will Ashton.
Hi, John.
And coming to us live from the internet, Kansas, she is the film editor for The Pitch and one of our favorite recurring guest stars on Cinemaholics. It's Abby Chessie.
Hi.
Abby, how have you been doing lately? What's been going on in your world since we last spoke, a few months ago?
Yeah, it's been a little while. I have been just hanging out here in my house in the internet, Kansas City. And I have been working as the film editor for The Pitch since about March, writing up film news and reviews over there.
Congratulations, by the way.
Thank you very much. It was pretty exciting. And in addition to that, I've been doing a running column on new streaming releases over at Crooked Marquee. So that's what's been keeping me busy most of the time.
Wonderful plug. And we'll be sure to link to Abby's Twitter and other things in the show notes. Definitely check out her work. We're glad to have you on the show, Abby, for what should be a pretty interesting episode with some films that, I didn't really see coming this week when we were looking into what the show might be about. But before we get into all that, you can find more episodes of Cinemaholics, including our full archive, every episode we've ever done on cinemaholics.com. Our email, if you want to reach out to us, is cinemaholics@gmail.com. And as always, we invite you to become one of our monthly patrons if you want to support the show directly. Our Patreon is patreon.com/cinemaholics. All that stuff is in the show notes as usual. And we appreciate all your support. All right, let's go through our off topics. A few things to get to before we get into our big reviews. First up, we had our latest Extra Milestone. Extra Milestone is our film anniversary series hosted by Sam Nolan. And this week, Sam invited Will Ashton and Julia Tatey onto the show to talk about the 1934 film All Quiet on the Western Front. Will, I just finished listening to the episode, and because I wasn't on it, I was sad that I had to miss it, but you guys did a great job. I really loved the rundown you did of this war movie, or this anti-war movie.
Well, thank you. I can't take credit. It's mostly Sam and Julia, but I appreciate the compliment nonetheless.
Definitely check that out. The conversation was fierce. Real quick, I want to say, lately I've been talking about video games here and there, and usually it's because if it's a game that's really cinematic. And I just want to say, I don't know if some of our listeners have heard of a new game called Ghost of Tsushima, which is really fun. It's kind of like if you took the films of Kurosawa and made an open world sort of combination of like Assassin's Creed and the Elder Scrolls games and just kind of mashed them together. I have been playing this game where it's like I'm living a samurai movie. If you love Kurosawa and Ozu films, you will probably enjoy, and if you love video games, you'll probably really enjoy this game. And so I wanted to plug it real fast. I am absolutely adoring it. I was playing a whole bunch of it this past week. There's this mode, for example, where I only play in this mode, where you literally, it's called Kurosawa mode, and you turn off the color. So it's like in black and white, and they actually like make the audio and some of the visuals like crackle like a real film reel. And it actually sounds like you're in a theater and you're playing the movie. I'm just saying, it's like no other video game experience I have ever experienced. And this is, of course, my obligatory, well, Ashton, you should play this game you're never going to play, and kind of go from there. But yeah, I don't know, Abby, if you like video games or Kurosawa, but if you know anybody who does, at least, I highly recommend it.
Great. Yeah, I've heard really good things about it. And I have been over the period of quarantine, I've been kind of slowly getting into video games. So eventually maybe my skill level will be up to the point where I can start playing that. I've been seeing nothing but really cool visuals and reviews from it.
I could definitely see you getting a real kick out of it, especially with all the film references that I'm sure you'll pick up on. But okay, real quick, we have a birthday shout out for Rebecca. So this comes to us from her friend Karen, who sent us a very brief email. Just want to point that out. Karen wants to know what we think of the Karen meme. And I don't know how to answer this question. I don't know what I think of the Karen meme, to be honest. But I don't know. Will Ashton, what do you think of the Karen meme?
Well, like you said before, it's kind of vague, so I'm not sure if she's referring to a specific Karen meme or just the like general Karen meme, but
I'm assuming it's like the general thing where now we're kind of calling disruptive white women Karens, and people are getting annoyed about it, I guess, or people named Karen are getting annoyed about it. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. Some of them I saw are funny, I guess. I mean, I don't know if I have like a fully fledged opinion on it. Sorry to disappoint, but
I am disappointed myself because I don't really either. I just think it's like much ado about not much. But I don't know. Abby, what do you think?
I go kind of hot and cold on it. Like, I get where it's coming from. I also know several Karens who are nice, and they're people named Karen, not Karens. But I have actually seen the most recent episode of the podcast Decoder Ring goes into the kind of origin and growth of the Karen meme. And I haven't listened to that yet, but Decoder Ring's a pretty good podcast. So I am really curious to see what Willa Paskin has to say about that.
All right. Yeah, I would much rather point our listeners, including Karen and her friend Rebecca, to that podcast. I'm sure they'll have a very fruitful conversation compared to us. Because, yeah, like I said, it's one of those things where, like, I don't know, memes are so ephemeral that I never find myself really thinking too deeply about them, or at least in terms of like these like cultural ones that are used as like shorthand. To me, it seems pretty harmless, and it's something that's going to kind of fade away in time. But yeah, you never know. I'm not an expert on social studies like that. So next up, I did want to point out there were other movies that came out this week that we are not covering. And one of them includes Kissing Booth 2, which is a sequel to one of the big Netflix romantic comedy successes from a couple years ago. This one has been scaring away film critics because of its long runtime of, you guessed it, 2 hours and 10 minutes for a Netflix romantic comedy. It seems pretty beefy for that sort of thing. But yeah, none of us saw it. But Will, I think you reached out to somebody who really knows these movies inside and out, or at least the first one. And did they have anything to say about Kissing Booth 2? Or because I think you said that this person has not seen it.
I believe you're referring to my 15-year-old sister.
Yeah.
Who I asked this week while I was on vacation. I was like, hey, have you seen The Kissing Booth? And she's like, oh, yeah. And I was like, well, what do you think of it? It's like, it's not that good. I don't think I finished it. And I'm like, okay, but that's probably good to know because you're the key target demographic for this. And if you're not really digging this, I can't imagine I would like it either. So that was very informative, I felt.
And Abby, I think you said you've heard some reactions to Kissing Booth 2. I have not. I don't know anyone who's seen it, but what's your ear on the ground for this one?
First of all, I had no idea that it was over 2 hours in length. That's ridiculous. But also, I have heard from just kind of general gathering that it's not quite as egregious as Kissing Booth 1 was, like not quite as cringeworthy, maybe a little more kind of female forward, which is good. I am happy to see more of that. I think I also saw something from an interview with Joey King, the star, where she said that it was critic proof, which as a critic kind of made me rankle a little bit. So I don't really have any. Yeah. I don't really have any big plans in the future to watch Kissing Booth 2, but I'm happy to know that of the two of them, it's the less bad.
Yes, I wouldn't be surprised either way because I have not seen the first movie and I don't really plan to. I don't know if I'll ever get to it ever. But there's another movie, Animal Crackers. Will, what is going on with Animal Crackers? Weren't we supposed to see this movie in 2017?
Yeah, I mean, I guess for a little bit of context, when we started out the show, I guess this would have been around February or March of 2017, you laid out this big spreadsheet of like all the films we would probably cover and like different things. And one week, I forget which, in 2017, you had the main review as this movie called Animal Crackers. And I'm like, John, what is Animal Crackers? And it's like, it's a movie that's coming out that week. I'm like, okay. I guess we'll get to it when we get to it. And we never did because it didn't come out then. It's apparently been some sort of prolonged legal battle where the release, I think it might have come out internationally throughout the past 2 or 3 years, but it never really got an official US release until now because Netflix somehow sorted it all out and released it. And it's apparently doing all right on there. I guess it's in the top 10. And that's where I remembered it was a thing because I was like, oh yeah, that was that movie John was insistent that we cover in 2017 if we could, but I guess now it's actually available for us. He has opted not to see it, so we have not covered it.
Yeah, I mean, you got to strike while the iron's hot, Will Ashton. I mean, my enthusiasm and the momentum for Animal Crackers died out in 2017 with its release date, unfortunately, for that film. But yeah, I haven't heard anything if it's good or bad. Curious if some listeners might check it out of curiosity. Reach out to us if you do and let us know about the film, if it's worth covering on the show. We'll leave it up to the listeners of Cinemaholics. And then last, Radioactive. We talked about this as I think this is on Amazon Prime Video, new film starring Rosamund Pike. And we talked about maybe covering this one on the show. But reviews were not very good for this and just kind of fell through the cracks for us. We decided to focus on other things. But Radioactive, yeah, I've heard the reviews are not very good. Abby, have you heard anything about this new movie?
I have not heard much that is positive about it. I've heard that it kind of fits into the biopic kind of trough pretty well, and then kind of escapes by the end, which is kind of a bummer because I really like Marjane Satrapi, the director, as an artist, and am interested to kind of see where her directing career goes. So it's a little bit of a disappointment to see somebody who I know can have kind of a creative and sometimes transgressive take on stuff do something that feels so traditional. I'm still kind of curious to check it out, but yeah, no big rush right now.
Yeah, I mean, my thoughts echo Abby. I mean, I was mostly interested because of the director. I quite enjoyed Persepolis and the voices. So I was like, oh, I'll keep this one in mind. But the reviews being as they were ultimately kept me from watching it, which is a shame. But I won't dissuade it. I mean, maybe somewhere down the road I'll check it out. But I was discouraged to hear that was kind of middling as far as its execution.
Yeah, I'm also a fan of the voices, which did, if you know the premise of that film, kind of, makes you kind of curious that this would be a kind of a different sort of biopic. But apparently that's not the case in a good way. So yeah, same for me. I did not prioritize this one. But again, if it comes to it, maybe people check it out at some point. It is streaming right now on Amazon Prime Video, so it's pretty accessible for subscribers of that service. All right, last thing. Will, you wanted to ask a question, raise a question to us about video on demand, and I'll let you do that now. I'm really chomping at the bit to address this.
I guess so. Yeah, I just was curious because this week they announced that Bill and Ted 3, Bill and Ted Face the Music, is going to be a in theater and on demand release on September 1st. And given just the general state of things in the US, that seems like it's primarily going to be a on demand release, and then maybe a few drive-ins throughout the country will play it. Which, I mean, I'm kind of two minds because on the one hand, I'm like, it's disappointing that such a big film that was meant to be in theaters, that fought really hard to be in theaters, is now going to get a quieter VOD release. But at the same time, I'm like, well, if it does go to a drive-in near me, that could be a really cool opportunity if they do say Bill and Ted Excellent Adventure followed by this, or maybe even Excellent Adventure, Bogus Journey, and then this new one, because you could see all three back to back to back. And then also it's like, would this really have done that well in theaters if it did? Because it's another comedy that's been long in the works and it's just coming out decades later. It's like traditionally that hasn't really done too well in theaters as far as these things go. So it's like maybe this was the wiser route because the people who were interested in it will see it directly, as opposed to they'll be like, oh, I'll just wait until it's on DVD or whatever. Now they'll probably check it out. But there's probably going to be that $20 asking price, which might dissuade people. So I was just kind of curious with that all in mind. Do you think other movies like this, not specifically Bill and Ted, but just other kind of big films, is it more viable or more in your interest to see some of these movies kind of just go to VOD now that we're going to be seeing this kind of quarantine period going into the fall, maybe even the spring? Or would you rather just a lot of them like Tenet just push back for a year or so now? I mean, it's going to probably waver with each movie, but just your general thoughts I was curious about.
Yeah, I think that similar to you, I'm of two minds, right? A movie like Bill and Ted Face the Music, it's not something I really like those movies. Those are very foundational films for me. They're films that I always really liked history. So I remember watching them when I was a bit younger and just really enjoying those characters and the time traveling shenanigans. And so the idea of them returning to Face the Music, I'm all for it. But that's not a film that I necessarily I would love to see it at a drive-in. I think that would be maybe even more fun than seeing it in a movie theater in some ways. For me, it's a little tricky because I don't know about YouTube, but drive-ins around me have been sold out like crazy. They sell out within 10 minutes of tickets going up. And that's for films that are already out. So things like Forrest Gump or whatever they're playing, that people are just anxious to go to drive-ins in my area. And I don't know if that's happening around, I don't know if that's happened for you, Will and Abby. And so that's something that's sort of dissuading me from relying on drive-ins, is maybe there's not enough supply to meet the demand in all locations. Also, yeah, I mean, films like Tenet and Mulan, I really want to see those on the big screen. I mean, I can't imagine not. We were talking about the new Pixar movie Soul. There's rumors that might go straight to Disney Plus. And
yeah, I was going to mention that too.
Yeah, the idea of seeing a new Pixar movie for the first time in at home is just, I don't know if I'm ready for that. I don't think I've ever seen a Pixar film for the first time outside of the theater. And I mean, Pixar films have defined my life. I mean, Toy Story is one of the first movies I ever saw in a theater. And since then, I've seen all of them in the theater. And so it's it feels part of me, it feels very resistant to this, because it's like we're losing something, or we have to leave something behind. And I don't want to believe that we're leaving it behind necessarily. This has to happen. And I wish something could change. And it seems to me one potential path for this is that some things are going to come out in VOD for the US, or premium VOD rental, that sort of thing. And then the rest of the world is going to get stuff because they're going to be able to open earlier than the United States. So that's the tension for me right now. What do you think of all this, Abby? What's going on in your head?
That's an excellent question and kind of a conundrum. Yeah, like the two of you, it depends on the film. Something like Tenet or the Wonder Woman sequel, or Mulan, I would much rather see on a larger screen because I feel like that's where it's going to make the most impact. But something that I've actually really appreciated is the kind of extra platform that going straight to VOD has given smaller releases, like stuff that may have played and actually currently is playing with limited capacity in my town on smaller, more independently owned theaters, but are actually getting a slightly larger exposure by being available on like Amazon or Netflix, when otherwise we would have had to wait a little bit longer. So this time, when I recommend that somebody watch a film that usually gets a smaller, more limited release, there's a larger likelihood that more people will be able to see it. So for smaller films, I think it's great. For Bill and Ted, I think I would probably be willing to watch that on a smaller screen rather than a big screen. There's something about those movies specifically that I think just kind of goes well with your couch and a big bowl of popcorn and a drink by your side. So that's, I think, something that I'm going to be happy to watch at home once it's out.
All right. Yeah. Excellent points. And, we could have a much longer conversation about this, including like all the financial implications, right? And there's a lot to discuss here, but we do have some movies to get to, so we'll do that now. Let's talk about one of those video on demand films. And I think it's a good example, Abby, of a movie that probably, I don't know if it ever was planned for theatrical release.
I think it was, but I was going to say, yeah, this movie and then last week's Relic are definitely, I think, two films that benefited enormously from this drive-in option. I know definitely Relic, I think, did much better than it would have in a normal theatrical climate, which is encouraging to hear.
Similarly for Greyhound in Palm Springs, in fact, I know that Greyhound, I have been hearing lots of people, like lots of word of mouth for this film in a way that it probably would have been overshadowed by a lot of the bigger releases that were supposed to come out in July. Greyhound is the Tom Hanks World War II film that we talked about a couple weeks ago. And I'm continuously shocked by how many more people like it. I thought I was maybe on an island with that film, and it is really worth checking out for a lot of listeners. And then Palm Springs, Will and I kind of debated a little bit whether or not that movie would have big legs theatrically, because Andy Samberg has a troubled filmography when it comes to box office, even though he has cult hits under his belt for sure. So all that said, we're going to talk about this new film that is hitting VOD, and I am curious if we would ever be talking about it otherwise. But this is the new film, The Rental.
Let me show you out back, and then I'll get out of your hair. The stars are insane out here.
I should have brought the telescope.
What do you need a telescope in the city for? Unless you're like a peeping Tom or something.
Charlie! Tell me that's not a camera.
Get through the night. We leave first thing in the morning.
What's going on?
I don't know.
The Rental is the directorial debut of Dave Franco, younger brother of James Franco. And I think, I don't remember everything we've seen him in recently. Obviously, The Disaster Artist was his last maybe major film. And then also like Little Hours, things like that. Did anything from 2018, 2019 Franco was in that I'm forgetting about?
When did the Now You See Me sequel come out? Was that 2018? Or is that 2017?
I think that was, maybe 2016.
Oh, was it? Oh man,
yeah, I think that was a while back. I guess there was also Nerve in 2016, and then I don't know. Oh yeah, sorry, he did have a quick role in Six Underground. Forgot about that one. But
he also was in If Beale Street.
Oh, that's true. Yes.
Yeah, that was where I was going to jump in and mention that he had a small role in If Beale Street Could Talk. It was still kind of like a smaller supporting role, though, not a starring one, obviously.
Right. So he hasn't been starring in a lot of things, I guess, but this new film is kind of like a paranoia thriller that he co-wrote with Joe Swanberg. Joe Swanberg is a guilty pleasure director for me. I've seen most of his films, and I like a lot of them. I obviously, Drinking Buddies is probably his most culturally recognizable one, and The Rental funny enough, is basically if Drinking Buddies turned into a slasher movie, basically at the very end. It stars Dan Stevens, Alison Brie, Sheila Vand, and Jeremy Allen White, also Toby Huss. Very, very recognizable cast. I think I've seen every one of these actors in at least one other thing. And of course, Dan Stevens and Alison Brie are probably the most recognizable characters in here. And the basic setup is kind of what we've seen before in plenty of other films of this nature. We have a group of friends, two couples actually. They decide that they want to get away for a weekend, and they essentially do an Airbnb rental out not too far from the Bay Area. And they go there, and some weird things start to happen. The man who is giving them the keys, he is clearly pretty racist, and he's has some racist attitudes toward Sheila Van's character. And we also have some relationship drama because Dan Stevens' character is married to Alison Brie's character. Alison Brie is Dave Franco's real life wife, by the way. And so we're seeing them kind of reunite creatively since, I guess, Little Hours and Disaster Artist. But yeah, so Dan Stevens and Alison Brie's characters are married, but clearly there's some kind of weird thing where Dan Stevens' younger brother, played by Jeremy Allen White, you've seen him in things like Shameless, and he is dating Dan Stevens' character's work partner, played by Sheila Vand, and clearly there's some kind of weird tension there. There's some kind of weird, maybe this person kind of likes this person and they shouldn't, and it's relationship drama, and that's really what the first part of this movie is, until it turns into a totally different kind of film. And I think that's sort of dividing audiences, this sort of like going from one type of thing to another type of thing. And I'm of the mind that it doesn't quite work. This is a new film from IFC, by the way. We talked about an IFC film last week, Relics. So they're kind of taking advantage of this blank slate in the release schedule. But let's talk about the rental, starting with you, Abby. What do you think of this movie? Is it worth checking out in your opinion?
I would say so. I actually kind of like the slow burn nature of it. I agree. It feels like the horror movie version of Drinking Buddies. And it's got that element of it going for about 3/4 of the film. And then things really ramp up in the last part. And I feel like, boy, do they ramp up hard. And something that I find particularly scary about this movie is that it's one of those where the you don't see the killer for a really long time, and then once they reveal themselves, you have really no idea of their motivation. You never learn much about their motivation, and their methods are super creepy and relentless. And it just kind of leaves this weird taste in your mouth of witnessing the actions of somebody who like has no guiding compass other than just wanting to murder. Which, as a woman who lives by herself, I find quite frightening. So there were parts of this movie that really did freak me out. And I think the performances are really good. It's great to see Sheila Vand in something where she has a role like this and more lines. I know her best from A Girl Walks Home Alone at Night, which she was awesome in, but if I remember correctly, mostly silent. So it's cool to see her in something a little bit less stylized.
Yeah, I remember seeing her in Argo. I think it was probably the first film I remember seeing her. And it's great to see her having a bigger role. I think every main actor in here is interesting to watch. And I think that's the tension for me, is I actually was invested in this movie almost the whole way through, because I liked that these were very despicable characters that were hard to sympathize with. There was something kind of nihilistic about that in a way that kind of spoke to me. Abby, you touched on just the paranoia in this movie. It is the sort of thing where it feels like there are some movies that like ruin summer activities. Jaws, for example, ruins like going out in the ocean. It makes you scared of that sort of fun activity. And in this case, the same sort of thing is happening with Airbnb. You really do not know, like this is a house that somebody could come and go as they please. Somebody else has the keys and you don't know, this is a stranger. And our social contract can kind of easily break down if one person just decides. And it's that sort of thing that really freaks me out. As just anybody, I think, can watch this and definitely relate with that fear that they might have of just taking such a big risk that we don't always consider a risk. But all right, Will Ashton, William Tyler, what did you think of the rental?
Yeah, I'm kind of two minds relating to Dave Franco, in that I think this is a very impressive debut in one sense and not an impressive debut in another. And I think what impressed me was Dave Franco as a director seemed pretty confident. He was pretty restrained in a way that I wasn't anticipating going into this. I felt his sensibilities as far as like kind of, it seems like some people are calling this a thriller, some people are calling it a horror movie. I see it more as a horror film with kind of like thriller dramatic elements in here. You might disagree with that, I don't know, but
I'm the exact other way around. I consider it a thriller with some minor horror elements, but it's worth debating.
Yeah, I mean, it's not really like it's definitely a light horror film, but I'd say I would qualify as a horror film overall. But yeah, I mean, I think his understanding of the genre, I mean, it's not particularly novel or individualistic as far as his approach to it, but he does seem to be pretty confident coming out of the gate. And I think, obviously, as being an actor, I think he gets a lot of good performances out of the main cast. And I think it's very economical as far as his approach, like focusing on one central location, kind of building the atmosphere and the dread from there. Showcases a young filmmaker that I think if he wants to continue directing, I could definitely see a bright future for him there. But as a screenwriter, I just don't think the characters are super fleshed out in a way that I found particularly intriguing or investing. I found like their central conflicts to be kind of just, basic in a way that I think it's not bad. Like, I think the performers do a good job with fleshing some good performances and good characters out of that. But I don't think what Dave Franco was doing as a writer was quite as interesting as what he was doing as a director here. And I think that's a shame, because I think if this maybe even had like a second or third pass as a screenwriting or a screenplay is concerned, I think this might have been something that was really solid and really something worth remarking upon. And I think as it stands right now, I think it's fine. It's solid. I definitely am impressed as far as seeing Dave Franco prove himself as a director, because I don't think he did any like short films or anything before this. I'm pretty sure this is like his first main thing. Like, he might have done like a Funny or Die video or something, but this is like his first real foray into directing. And I think it definitely shows that he has some chops, and he took inspiration pretty well from his past collaborators. But yeah, I think it's solid. It's fine. Like, I think it's a pretty decent debut, but it's not really a film that I think lives up to its full potential. And I don't imagine it's going to be a film that sticks with me long after. But for the 90 minutes that I was watching it, I wasn't bored.
Yeah, it's a short movie, graciously short. And in some ways, I actually found that to be maybe a detriment. And my main criticism of this film is that for me personally, I think that last thriller portion where you say it's more like a horror movie, I just thought was completely underwhelming. I just did not find it. And I think, Abby, you disagree, so I want to hear what you have to say about it and what worked for it with you. But I don't know, just something about it. It did not stick out to me. It did not feel satisfying in any sort of way. Not that like death is satisfying, but just sort of like the whole idea of like being hunted and characters trying to overcome these very difficult circumstances and survive. Just nothing about it really stood out, I suppose, for me. You were right, Will, that Dave Franco, this is his first time really directing something. I think he's only written and executive produced other films that are more like short films. And yeah, aside from like Funny or Die, which I think he has directed at least one of those shorts that he's done or that he's been in. So it is interesting to see him kind of come out and kind of in the shadow of his older brother, who has been under a lot of public scrutiny lately, directing his first thing. And we know, of course, James Franco's directed quite a few films. And yeah, it's interesting to see him break out. And when I was going into this, I was looking for that. You kind of called it like individualistic style. What is his approach as a filmmaker? And overall, I credit some of the things I like about this film probably more to Joe Swanberg, because the things that I got invested in, which things I tend to like about Joe Swanberg films, like Win It All, for example, is the sort of sympathizing with dark characters you're not supposed to like. I think Joe Swanberg and Dan Stevens are really the secret weapon to making that work. I think that Dan Stevens is such an incredible actor that you are able to like a terrible and unlikable person. And not like in the sense where you root for him necessarily, but you want to watch him continue on screen and you want to see what he's going to do next because his choices just seem well written and the performance is really there. And I think that one thing you can credit Dave Franco with is that I think he is good at bringing those performances out of those actors. I think he's working with really great actors and I don't think that they're let down in this instance. And I actually had the thought, I was like, man, Dan Stevens, just the versatility that this guy is bringing, I think between this and Eurovision and Apostle and so many other great films he's done, a lot of his work in general, he really is one of our best male actors right now. I think that he's like climbing the ranks quickly and he's really overwhelming, I think, his body of work to support that insistence that I have for him and his career. But yeah, Abby, I want to hear from you. It sounds like you did like the latter portion of this film, so let's talk about that a little bit. And I want to open it up here for some light spoiler talk, actually. So if you don't want to know anything about anything that happens in the last part of the film, we won't get too detailed necessarily, but just be careful because you might not want to know too much. So that said, Abby, what was your take on this portion of the film?
Yeah, thanks for opening it up to light spoiler talk, because I probably will get into some light spoiler territory. I did want to say that I think another thing that is sort of a hallmark of Joe Swanberg's style that I think shows up in the film in a big way is that he always goes for these kind of naturalistic interactions and setups, which, depending on what you want in a movie, may or may not work for you. They kind of sometimes they do work and sometimes they don't work for me. I think it's an interesting approach in a genre like this. But I also feel like a movie like this relies so much on tension that a little more structure, I think, would have done this movie some good. The fact that it is only 80 minutes, I think is pretty interesting, but there's a way to kind of make that feel a little tighter than it does. But what it does do, I think, is set up some interesting dynamics between the characters that feel like actual real relationships. So like throughout the movie, Alison Brie's character, who's married to Dan Stevens, has to kind of wrestle with some truths about her relationship with her husband, some details that she might not have previously known, as well as she frequently kind of feels like the odd character out. And I feel like that performance especially feels, her reactions to that feel very natural and real in a way that I really sympathized with. So what happens to her character later on in the film, I found really kind of surprising and sort of a bummer, because of all of them, she feels like the one that is the most final girl-ish. Like I'm not going to try to spoil too much. Like everybody ends up getting something bad that happens to them. But out of all of them, I think I sympathized with her character the most. But yeah, I think the interesting thing for me in the last part of this movie, like, doesn't happen until like the very, very end. And it sort of pulls away to show what a microcosm the story that we just watched is in the actions and life of the person who is committing these crimes, who's like setting up the Airbnb and terrorizing and trying to kill the people who stay in the Airbnb. And it's just this weird kind of macro sense of what matters, what doesn't matter, how little the lives of the people that we've been watching actually matter to the person who's trying to kill them. And I think that was the thing that scared me the most. There's nothing that freaks you out like a sense of your own insignificance. And that, I think, was something that this movie kind of brought to the fore for me in a way that kind of shocked me in the final moments. Yeah,
that's some really interesting points there, because yeah, I had that feeling, and it's not an opposite feeling, but it definitely was this sort of wish I had that the final minutes and at the end credits, like that creepiness, like that, like I said before, paranoia could have been maybe stretched to match the entire film. I think we could have had something that maybe brings on that thing that works for you on a bigger scale, maybe. That's just one thought I have. But yeah, I'm curious what you think, Will. You kind of mentioned that some of this stuff didn't work for you. Was it really more of how the kills themselves? Was it, because you mentioned you like the tension and the atmosphere and things to that nature, but yeah, when it came to the actual like slasher movie details, is that what fell short for you?
Yes and no, I guess, because I found the slash elements to be fine. Like, I don't think they're particularly inventive or like unique in any particular way, but they're not poorly done. I didn't find them to be necessarily grating in any particular sense, but yeah, I mean, they're fine. Like, I think that wasn't really what took me out of it in any particular sense. So much as I just kind of had mixed feelings throughout the film as far as the approach. Like, I think I admired the slow burn that was going on before it. I just didn't think the characters themselves were as fleshed out or as like narratively investing as I think maybe Joe Swanberg and Dave Franco thought. Like, I found them to be kind of composites more than they were really fully fleshed characters. But I think the actors themselves really do a lot of the heavy lifting there, especially like we're saying, Sheila Vand and Alison Brie. I think they're both quite good in this. I think they bring a lot of interesting characteristics to their performances that I think makes them feel a little bit more relatable than they were on the page, at least in my view. But yeah, I mean, overall, I just kind of have mixed feelings about, I think, the writing of the film. And I guess it's kind of a credit to the fact that Joe Swanberg, from what I can tell, traditionally does more like improv, I mean, like kind of like workshops his scripts like as he's making them. And it seems like this one kind of stuck to the script a little bit more than his other films, as far as like as a director. But I don't know if that was maybe the shortcoming there, is that like maybe they just didn't have a little bit more of that like kind of like ingrained realism that I think might have made it a little bit more fleshed out, a little bit more investing for me at least. But yeah, as far as the slasher elements that you were referring to, I thought they were fine. Like, I don't really have any strong negative feelings as far as those.
All right. Yeah. So I guess we can safely assume that we have a good range of opinions here, and that's good, because I think that this is a film that maybe is a little tricky to recommend for some folks. So to finish out, as I give my grade on this one, I maintain that I think that this is mainly a thriller film. I don't think that the horror is strong enough to really like classify it, at least for me. I don't think I would come to someone and say, you want a horror film? Here you go. I'd say, here's a thriller film with like some light horror elements, just my opinion. And then I want to hear from Abby too, what you think about this, because I don't think we really heard from you fully on that. But yeah, I agree with a lot of what everybody's saying. I think that, I do think this Dave Franco as a director, this is a like half and half debut. Some of it's impressive, some of it's not. I agree that it is pretty confident overall. I think that the central location and the atmosphere and the building of it makes for an overall decent experience. I think that, yes, it's economical in the sense that it's 88 minutes and they're not trying to do too much. And it's not one of those directorial debuts where everything is being thrown at the wall here. But at the same time, I think it's pretty fair to say that this isn't Franco really putting a stamp on a film as a director. And he's probably not trying to do that. And I kind of like that. I think, Will, you said it was more restrained. I do actually appreciate that to quite an extent. I don't think every directorial debut needs to be a total flash of style in order for a director to really say, this is me, everyone. So I do appreciate it on some level. But yeah, I just think that the final act is pretty mediocre. I was pretty underwhelmed. I didn't think the explanations for everything were that satisfying. I do agree with Abby in the sense that like that very final section does sort of raise things that are really creepy, and some of that stuff did kind of bring me to, that's an interesting way to end this movie, but it did also make me question why the rest of the movie couldn't have been played up in this way. And I felt like I was presented one thing and then I got something else, and I'm having a little bit of a jarring experience to that, which is why I wonder if other people might watch this and have the same experience. Last thing I'll say before I give my grade, I do think Alison Brie is really good. I agree with that. I think that this kind of character she's playing is usually pretty vilified. This character is usually like the nagging kind of person or somebody that you can't sympathize with as much. And you're just like, why can't she just not be here right now? And what I like about this, and who knows, maybe it kind of plays into the fact that she is married to the director, is I think this character is given more sympathy and agency and a character arc that I think is a bit more satisfying compared to what we may have gotten in a different film. So even though I don't totally enjoy how all of that stuff ends out, and I do have to call out Alison Brie's drug-fueled dialogue is really fun and one of my favorite aspects of the movie. I have to say I'm going to go with a C+ on the rental. I do think it's worth renting. I think not to be too cute about it. And in this case, like a C+, it's like, it's okay. That's not saying that it's bad. Not saying that it's not worth watching or anything like that. I just think that it's okay. I think some people are going to enjoy it. Some people are going to maybe not enjoy it as much. I couldn't see somebody like really hating this, but I guess that's possible. But Abby Olchesi, what about you? What's your grade on this? And, I asked you earlier if you could talk more about what you think of the genre in this case. And yeah, just any final thoughts you have.
Sure. I think I would probably give this a solid B. And I would also, I'm kind of 50-50 on the thriller / horror elements. I think the first several parts of it really do lean more in the thriller territory, but the nature of the killer himself, I think, is purely like a horror kind of creation. There's definitely some recognizable hallmarks that they're picking up on there, in ways that kind of harken back to John Carpenter's Halloween, which also has sort of a long, slow burn introduction of the actual killer, and similarly wears a mask that covers his entire head. And also some ways that harken to Michael Haneke's movie Cache, which is, I think, a solid thriller. So it's got elements of both for sure, which makes it really hard to classify. But like in the days of rental stores, I think it probably would have been accurately at home in either of those sections. So if you're a person who only watches thrillers and doesn't like horror, this might be an interesting introduction into some elements of that. But yeah, I think it kind of fits into both, which can sometimes make it a little harder to classify and enjoy if you're more purely one or the other. But yeah, I like it. I think there are some parts of it that could be a little tighter. I think as a directorial debut, I think it's a really interesting kind of toe in the water for Dave Franco. There were times when I was watching it that I felt like years in the future, if he does end up making more films and they do end up being a little more individualized or particularly of one kind of genre or another, that this would be an interesting one to come back to and kind of recognize the roots of a person's career. Again, I know that's super jumping the gun, but I think there's a lot of potential here, and a couple of scenes that have some really good framing that I think show that he is at least a person to kind of continue paying attention to, if not be excited for the things he does in the future. So yeah, a solid B from me. And I think a good recommendation for the situation that we're currently in. This isn't one that I would like rush out to the theaters to go see, but one that I would heartily recommend for like a Saturday night rental, which is what I did.
All right. Yeah, I think we'll have to have you back on to talk about Dave Franco's filmography as a whole, maybe in 15, 20 years when we're discussing the 20 films of Dave Franco, and it all started with The Rental, I suppose. But all right, Will Ashton, finish us out. What are your final thoughts and grades on The Rental?
Yeah, I mean, well, first, just to clarify a couple things. I mean, when I do talk about the movie being economical and restrained, I mean, those are compliments. Like, I don't want to make it sound like that's any sort of detriment to the film. Like, I do applaud James Franco for knowing what film he is making. And I think the style does come out. Sorry, Dave Franco. Dave Franco, as far as...
It was a Franconian slip.
Yeah, I guess so. But yeah, I mean, as far as the approach to the film, I do think there's enough style here that it doesn't need to be its own thing. Like, I don't expect any filmmaker coming right out of the gate to have everything figured out as far as like what they want to do to make their style any different from any other filmmaker. I think this is intentionally trying to be evocative of other filmmakers, like you were saying, Abby, like John Carpenter and a few others. Like, I think those are all intentional, and I think that's perfectly fine for a debut. Yeah, and as far as the horror thriller thing, I mean, I'm not married to either. I think I ultimately agree more with Abby in that, like, I think it fits in either genre fine. I'm just more willing to call it a horror movie because I think so often horror movies get classified as something else when they do well or tend to do well. So I want to clarify that, like, this is, I think, more than not a horror movie. Not that it like scared me out of my wits or anything. If anything, I think it could have done a little bit more in the horror department to really win me over, but I think it fits in that category more than it doesn't. So as far as the film itself, yeah, I think I've kind of mostly summed up my thoughts. The only thing I really wanted to say was that I realized as I was watching the credits that Sean Durkin produced this, who is the filmmaker behind Marcy May Marlene, and a few other films I really liked. And that reminded me that I think Dave Franco's greatest strength here is that he surrounded himself with a lot of collaborators who are really talented and know what they're doing. For instance, the film was shot by Kristen Spellinger. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right, but
It's a Christian Springer.
yeah, Kristen Springer, who did my favorite film of 2017, Brigsby Bear, as well as Atlanta and Glow and Guava Island and a few other things I think are really good. And Baskets. And then the score is from like the guys who I believe did like the music for like The Lodge. And I think
Danny Bensi and Sandra Jurians, right?
Yeah, like The One I Love and a few other films. And I really like the score of this. I didn't talk about that enough. I think that is really one of the main ways that this movie is able to stay together really quite well. And the editing I thought was pretty strong, especially for a debut. And I think that guy also worked on like Barry and Atlanta and a few other things I quite enjoy. So I think that's really, I think where the movie comes together is that like, it's clear that Dave Franco knew what he wanted to do here. I think he handled himself pretty well. And I think he surrounded himself with collaborators who know what they're doing and helped him kind of cradle that vision. And I think that as a result, he made a pretty decent debut. I just wish the screenplay was a little bit more robust and a little bit more meaty as far as what it's trying to do and what it's trying to say. Ultimately, I think it just kind of comes in a little half-hearted in that category, which I think ultimately is a bummer, because I think if that was as strong as the other elements here, this would have been a film that would have been championed as maybe like a B plus type film. But as it stands, I go back between B- and C plus. I'm somewhere around the middle of you two. I think I'm going to give it a low B- just because I think the craftsmanship here is solid enough to the point where I don't feel bad recommending it. But I do agree with you, John, that I think by the end, I did feel this kind of underwhelming sensibility where I was just kind of hoping that it would win me over just a little bit more than ultimately did. But I think there's enough here to recommend and enough that I took out of it that it's a worthwhile watch. And I'll keep an eye out for what Dave Franco has in store. I believe, if I read correctly, he wrote a romantic comedy to do next after this. And I think once the pandemic, if it ever ends in a timely fashion, I think that's what he wants to direct next. So it seems like he's going to diverse himself as a filmmaker a decent bit from here. So I'm curious to see where he goes. But as a debut, I think he did a nice job.
All right. Yeah, I'm actually pretty surprised that I'm the lowest grade on this, but that's not a bad thing. I think that that is an interesting treatise, maybe, or a discussion for another day on the idea of how the ending of a film can sometimes ruin the whole film for someone. And I guess that's kind of what happened with me, because I actually was more of like with you, Abby, I was like more of a B on this most of the way through. But good range of opinions here between us. Yeah, so C plus for me, B minus for Will, and a B for Abby. And not bad. That's not a bad range. Let's get into our next film, Yes, God, Yes. And Abby, you checked this one out. It stars Natalia Dyer, who you might recognize quickly from Stranger Things. I think she plays Nancy. And this is a sort of dramedy sort of thing that premiered in 2019 at South by Southwest. And it is playing right now in drive-in theaters and virtual cinemas. I've really been looking forward to checking this out for, I heard about it a while back, and I was kind of like, oh yeah, that's kind of interesting. But when I started to see some like chatter about this film, that A, it takes place in the early 2000s, and B, it's sort of about being in like an evangelical, in this case, Catholic church environment when you're coming of age. That's when I was like, oh, it's a movie about me. And so I now am very curious how this one turns out, and I'm hearing some good reviews. But Abigail Chessie, let's hear from you. What is Yes, God, Yes about, and what did you think of the movie?
Yeah, I'm so glad to have the opportunity to talk more about this, because I like this movie a lot. I actually reviewed it for Crooked Marquee, so if you want to check out the review, you can go over there and kind of read full thoughts on it. But yeah, I actually originally did see this in 2019 when it premiered at South by Southwest, and at the time, I remembered thinking, like, I really had some strong reactions to it. And then because of the festival setting, kind of second guessing a lot of it, where I was just like, is it really as good as I thought it was? But checking it out again to review just this last week, like it's as good as I thought it was, and actually better. It's about Natalia Dyer's character, Alice. It's going to be really hard for me not to call her Nancy. Alice, who is a sophomore at a Catholic high school around 2001. And this is, of course, like the beginning of like the real sort of digital age where AOL is still a thing, and AIM, AOL Instant Messenger, is like a thing that she is on frequently. And so two things kind of happen to Alice early in the film that sort of cause the catalyst for the rest of the plot. One is that she kind of stumbles into a dirty chat, basically, through AIM that she's not meaning to get into. But her reaction to it is that she feels kind of turned on by it and doesn't really understand why. And the second is that some kids in her high school are accusing her of performing a sex act at a party with a boy that she likes, who has a girlfriend. And she didn't do this, but she can't properly convince other people that she didn't. And in the midst of all this, they're getting pretty strict lessons on sexual education from their priest, played by Timothy Simons, who's great in this movie, very awkward and funny. And so Alice decides that she is going to kind of regain her social standing and clear her name by going to a 4-day retreat that's put on by her school. So she goes with a group of kids to this retreat, and she is kind of simultaneously presented with a challenge of further temptation in the form of one of the counselors who she kind of has the hots for, and also kind of the hypocrisy of how she feels naturally and what she's being taught. So there's sort of an ongoing confrontation within Alice herself, and then eventually outwardly with her teachers and some of the other students. So yeah, I grew up in the early 2000s, or came of age in the early 2000s as well. Didn't have a Catholic background, but had a lot of similar experiences to Alice in terms of like certain elements of youth retreats and being taught very conflicting things between my church and my school, and things that I was coming to understand myself. And I think the advent of online chat had a lot to do with that, actually. So yeah, John, like you, when I saw this movie, there were several points throughout where I just was shocked at how close to my own experience it came. There are certain elements of the retreat that if you have been to a youth retreat in any way, shape, or form, evangelical or Catholic or whatever, like there are parts of this that you will recognize, and it will kind of frighten you and make you laugh very hard, which is what I did. It was one of those films that I was kind of glad that I got to watch by myself, because it feels like it really had a personal connection for me. And also I could react loudly to certain parts of it. But yeah, Natalia Dyer does a great job kind of engaging very naturally with the story. Nothing is really over the top. All of it feels very emotionally accurate. And yeah, Timothy Simons is great as sort of the awkward, a little bit too earnest priest. And Donna Lynn Champlin of Crazy Ex-Girlfriend. Yeah, of Crazy Ex-Girlfriend is in this as well, and kind of a smaller role. But she's also very good. So yeah,
love her.
Yeah. All around, it's kind of a low-key film. But like I was saying earlier, one of those that I think really benefits from getting a on-demand release like this. I think you can currently rent it from a lot of digital cinemas. So you can watch it and support your local theater if that's what you'd like to do. But in a couple weeks, I think it comes out on like a proper VOD release, which
I think in a few days.
In a few days.
Yeah.
That's right. Yeah. So it'll be even more accessible to people. So I hope a lot of people watch it, because it's really a very charming and fun movie.
That's yes, God, yes. And I am saying yes, God, yes, to watching this movie. And the main reason is, a lot of what you're saying really appeals to me personally. This does sound like the kind of comedy I would enjoy. You know, it looks to me like something that could be a better version of a movie I like but don't love, Miseducation of Cameron Post, which is also a film kind of going back to like, in that film's case, the 1990s, in this sort of like, that was more about like a Christian gay conversion therapy camp. This one seems to be a little bit more of like a heterosexual sort of take on it, which I'll probably just more directly relate to. But then also just the idea that, you know, just seeing like these characters like almost like this is a response to Saved, you know, because that's a film that actually came out during this time. So I'm curious how it's going to compare to that. And I really like Natalia Dyer. She's done some minor performances in bigger films like Velvet Buzzsaw, but I always thought that she was like a character in Stranger Things who doesn't quite get her due for how talented I think she really is. And not to criticize her too much in that show or anything. It's just something that I've always felt like she does have the chops to really be in something like this, like it's just a really sparkling indie dramedy. So I'm definitely looking forward to checking this one out. And would you say your grade for this one was?
I would give this an A.
An A from Abby. A for Abby. And,
that's right.
Glad to hear it. All right. High recommendation from you. Yeah, like you said, it's going to be on more VOD options starting on July 28th. But yes, definitely support your virtual cinema this way. I wish I had done that before we started this episode. I really want to see this and really, really anxious to check this one out as well. And then, Will, I think you said that you want to check it out at some point, correct?
Yeah, I mean, I was somewhat familiar with the short film that I believe this is based on. And then
from 2017.
Yeah. And then I forgot they made the feature as well, but it's exciting to hear that it is as good as it is. So I'll have to keep this on my radar.
Yes, definitely. I have to be honest, guys. I have to be honest. If I ever make a movie, it's probably going to be about Bible camp retreats like this. And it'll probably take place in like 2004. That's just putting it out there. If it ever actually happens, I don't think I'll ever make a movie. I don't really want to. But if I do,
swashbuckling Bible camp movie.
I'm not good enough to make I would not do that because if I'm going to make a swashbuckling film, it has to be amazing. And I don't think I have the talent to do that, unfortunately.
I guess maybe the listeners don't know what I'm referring to. When I've talked to John about like if we were to make movies we'd make, you said you'd probably make like a swashbuckling kind of like Zorro film because but
it would have to be like when I'm at my absolute prime. If I was doing like a feature debut, it would be something like this because I feel like I have to get this story off my chest about what it was like to go to these things when we were in middle school. So
very interesting. Yeah.
That's Yes, God, Yes, an A from Abigail Chelsea. High recommendation. Let's finish the show out with our final review. This is the documentary for, unfortunately, tragically, the late John Lewis, who passed away recently. This documentary came out recently as well on July 3rd, and it's called John Lewis, Good Trouble. Will Ashton, you had a chance to see this film, which features a lot of prominent voices, specifically in the Democratic Party. I think Hillary Clinton shows up in this, along with Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and many others. I think Bill Clinton as well, and lots of familiar faces. So John Lewis, Good Trouble. This is a new documentary. And how can people stream it, by the way? I think this is VOD. Am I correct about that?
Yeah, I believe it's VOD. I checked it out through a virtual cinema. I felt that was the best way to go. I actually went with my old college art house theater because I felt like if I'm going to see an educational film, I might as well pay my due to the educational theater that I went to in college.
Can you plug it so some of the listeners who might be interested could check it out through there?
Oh, sure. Yeah. That's the Athena Cinema in Athens, Ohio. One of the oldest and most historic art house theaters in the country. I would highly, highly recommend supporting them if you want to support a local indie cinema. I have gone to that place many a times, and I've had nothing but very positive and affirming experiences. So if you want to support any particular indie theater, that would be a great one to support for sure. So this is a documentary that had the, I guess, kind of fortunate, unfortunate timing of coming out just a few weeks, I believe, before like you said, John Lewis untimely passing on the 17th of July. And I was on my radar before this, but I knew when he passed that I definitely needed to make a point to see this. And I think we would have talked about it on our last episode if we weren't recording it earlier than we usually do. So I definitely wanted to make a point to see it. And I'm glad I did because I think as a film, it's a very lovely and emotional tribute to the civil rights leader who I believe he's been taught about in a good bit. But if you don't know, like he has had a 60-year career of fighting for civil rights. He marched with Martin Luther King. I believe Stephen James played him in Selma. If I remember,
2015 film.
Yeah. So you might recognize him. Yeah, you might recognize him from there. But I mean, he is just, one of the most historic political figures in U.S. history. And I think, I think a lot of people did feel his passing just because he was such a, present figure throughout our recent history and in our past as well. And, this documentary really does a nice job of exploring his history and his legacy in a way that I don't think if you go into knowing a good bit about him, I don't think you're going to like walk away like learning that much, because it doesn't dive particularly deep into his history or who he was as a person. But I do think, as at least, you know, like as a starter point for anybody who wanted to know about him and what he was able to accomplish on his time in this earth, I definitely think it's a good primer in that respect. But I also think is, you know, as a send off to this political figure, I think it's a very lovely and meaningful film. We get a lot of time spent with John Lewis where he is speaking about his history. We also see him at a lot of political rallies and talking to people, and we get to see firsthand kind of this fly in the wall perspective of him just, you know, changing people as like he just like goes by and just, you know, has all these very nice interactions with people, and they get to tell him about how much he meant to them. And, you know, it's so clear that like he was such a meaningful figure for so many reasons. And I think this movie is very respectful and gentle as far as who he was, and seeing him get the send off in a way. I guess it wasn't really intended to be a send off, but it does work in that respect for, you know, this figure who continued to his final days to really represent a lot of people and do a lot of good. But as far as the execution of the film itself, I mean, I don't think it does anything that you wouldn't expect. Like, I think it definitely does kind of just feel like a glorified TV documentary. And I don't mean that to be like too derogatory or too negative. I just mean that like it's not exceptionally cinematic as far as its approach or what it's trying to do. But I think it's smart in that for the most part, it just focuses on John Lewis, letting him speak for himself, having family of his speak for him and his history. And I guess as far as the like talking heads segments that you're talking about with Hillary and Bill Clinton and AOC, and
I think Nancy Pelosi is supposed to be in it as well.
Yeah, I believe she is. Yeah, she has a couple segments. I could kind of take or leave those because they kind of just feel like a way of selling the movie to me. Like I didn't really think those segments particularly added too much to the film, but I don't think they're particularly bad to have either. I just kind of felt like, you know, like they're there just to kind of like throw in the trailer, like, hey, these people are in it. But I think the movie itself, it comes from a filmmaker named Dawn Porter, who I haven't seen her other films before this, but I think she does a nice job with this. And I think she knows that, you know, ultimately it's about John Lewis, and John Lewis is good about speaking for himself and representing himself. And the movie just ultimately follows him more than it doesn't. And it, like I said, it's not a particularly deep film as far as like exploring his life and legacy and all that, but I think it's a very nice film all the same. And so I give it a pretty hearty B- for that reason.
All right. Yeah. I'm glad you mentioned Dawn Porter. Yeah, Dawn Porter has made some really great documentaries since, I think her first one was Gideon's Army, which came out, I think 7 or 8 years ago. And,
yeah, I did hear about that one. I didn't get a chance to see it, but I know it got good reviews.
That one is about a group of Black public defenders in South America. And one of her more, I think, provocative, in a good way, provocative projects was Spies of Mississippi, which was it was kind of a shorter documentary, and it was kind of tackling the fact that when she was making the film, there was only one abortion clinic in all of Mississippi. And just them making this film, they had to like hire police to stand guard outside of the screenings because anti-abortion activists were basically they had to like check weapons basically because there were some threats. And so it's wonderful that Dawn Porter was brought on for this, because I think she definitely resembles that motto of the getting into good trouble, you know, making things that are intended to provoke because of the fact that they definitely bring up something that is necessary to hear, but not everyone wants to hear it. And yeah, I'm looking forward to getting into this one. I have it rented and ready to watch and everything. And yeah, this whole thing with John Lewis, we recently also saw the passing of Elijah Cummings. And I think one of these things that I think that this documentary can serve like its purpose is that I think that it can educate people who kind of celebrate civil rights leaders performatively. They lionize or try to come off like they're lionizing these civil rights leaders, when really, in actuality, they're constantly fighting to undermine what these heroes stand for. I'm going to say my own personal political opinion here, but people like Marco Rubio, who post a photo of himself and Elijah Cummings and and says that it's John Lewis, I think is so indicative of that. And what this documentary serves to do, it's to show those people, this is who this person really was, and challenge you to actually get into it. I mean, this is a guy who actually met these people and couldn't tell them apart. And that sort of tells you everything you need to know about how some people view these civil rights leaders as sort of like ornaments, or sort of like how they treat Martin Luther King, of like, oh yeah, of course I like Martin Luther King. Now here are all of these voter suppression tactics I'm using to disenfranchise people of color. And look, it's a political documentary. I'm going to get political. That's just something that I really think that this is what these documentaries can do. It's like some people, like those politicians I'm talking about, it doesn't really matter. They're probably not going to watch these things. But if you're definitely of a mind where you do want to know the difference between John Lewis and Elijah Cummings, two wonderful American heroes, this is a great starter for that, and definitely worth watching in that sense, based on what I'm hearing about it. And I'm looking forward to seeing it for myself.
Yeah, Elijah Cummings actually interviewed in the film as well. And it's funny that you bring up the Mark Rubio thing, because there's a segment in the film where he talks about how often he is confused for John Lewis, to the point where he just goes along with it because he's like, I don't want to tell these families that I'm not John Lewis. But yeah, I mean, that was on the back of my mind as well when I was watching the film.
All right. Well, sorry, my rant is over. And then Abby, I know
Get off
we
your
were talking.
soapbox.
Yeah. Abby Old Chessie, I know you were saying off the air that you're also looking forward to seeing this one as well, and I'm curious what you might think of it.
Yeah, I'm definitely looking forward to checking it out. I've appreciated John Lewis's career and life and many contributions for a very long time, and I think it's great to see him kind of getting the cinematic bio due that he really deserves. I know I don't want to compare him to other people, but I know like Ruth Bader Ginsburg has been kind of in a similar vein in terms of just somebody who's done a lot over the course of their life. And I enjoyed the RBG documentary quite a lot, and so it's nice to see that given to. It's nice to see that same platform given to somebody who's done so much for the civil rights movement. So yeah, I'm really looking forward to seeing it and kind of using that as an opportunity to remember John Lewis's life and kind of respect all of the great stuff that he's done and see what I can do to be a better ally, basically.
Absolutely. Same here. And yeah, that's like Will said, that's streaming now on virtual cinemas and VOD. Definitely seek it out. Let's finish out the show with what we might be reviewing next week. Here are some of the films on our radar. One of them is Summerland and IFC Films, another IFC film. They just keep coming out. This one's directed by Jessica Swale and it stars Gemma Arterton and Guggen Batu-Ra, among others. And I don't know too much about this, but I think, Abby, we were kind of talking about it off the air, and I think this is like a British drama, might be worth checking out. And we also have Cutthroat City, which was supposed to come out a while ago. Will and I already kind of prefaced. This is the one directed by RZA, stars Shamik Moore and Demetrius Shipp Jr., among others. T.I., I think, is in this. Wesley Snipes. It's quite a cast. And apparently that's going to finally be coming out. I'm curious if that's going to be any good. We also have The Informer, which is from Aviron Pictures. Another one I don't know too much about. I think it premiered the Crime Festival Circuit or the UK last year. It's another British film. This one's a crime thriller. Directed by Andrea DiStefano, and it's based on a novel. So, yeah, Joel Kinnaman is the main star in this. Anna Armas is in it as well, with Rosamund Pike, Common, Clive Owen. Another interesting one with a good cast, although Joel Kinnaman has kind of been hit or miss. Depends on what you think of Suicide Squad, I suppose. And then last, Black is King. There might be a few others, but the last one I have on my list is Black is King, which is hitting Disney Plus this week. This is like the live action Lion King Beyonce visual companion, I think is how it's like a tie-in album basically that Beyonce made to coincide with this remake. And I'm kind of interested in that one. I'm not usually into like these sorts of projects, but if that's something you're interested in, if you have Disney Plus and you want to keep justifying that purpose, maybe you already burned through the whole library, the whole Disney vault's been unlocked for you. This might be a new Disney Plus thing you're interested in. But Will, Abby, did I miss anything? What else? Is anything else coming out?
I think that mostly covers it for me. I think there's some pretty promising releases coming out. I'm actually kind of looking forward to Summerland. I've seen the trailer for that, and I think it looks like it could be kind of a nice, pleasant period drama, which is something that I don't know. I enjoy watching, so I could get behind that one.
Yeah, I mean, the only big one that I noticed was She Dies Tomorrow, which is the Amy Seimetz film. I've been hearing a lot of good things about that one, and I'm very excited about that one. I hope we get to cover that next week. And I believe Jay Baruchel has a film called Random Acts of Violence that's coming out. I don't know too much about it other than his involvement, but that's another thing. And then the Ron Howard Rebuilding Paradise documentary, which I believe is for National Geographic. But if any of those are of interest, I guess let us know in the comments if that's something you'd like to hear us cover.
Absolutely. And you can also email us, as always, cinemahawkspodcast@gmail.com. Thank you, as always, for listening. Thank you, Abby, for coming on the show. It's always great to have you on and talk these movies, and especially ones that we missed. So thank you again.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me on. It's always good fun to be on Cinemaholics.
All right, that'll do it for us this week on Cinemaholics. From the Internet California, I am John Negroni.
And for the Internet Pennsylvania, I'm Will Ashton.
From the Internet Kansas City, I'm Abby Olchesi.
We'll see you next time.